This afternoon to speak regarding the nomination of William Barr to serve as the next Attorney General of our country. First, I want to take a few minutes to reflect on the circumstances surrounding this vacancy. I believe that every member of this chamber should use this occasion to decide ultimately whether we believe Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for all Americans, or whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General really for one American. When President-elect Trump selected then Senator Jeff Sessions, our colleague from Alabama, to serve as Attorney General for this country, it brought me no joy to vote against our longtime colleague and friend. The truth was, though, that his views, my views, were too often diverged on many important issues. They included immigration, health care, civil rights, voting rights, LGBT rights, environmental protection, and more. And after considerable prayer and reflection, I reached the conclusion that Senator Sessions would not be an Attorney General for all Americans. Unfortunately, during his tenure at the Department of Justice, he went on to preside over a number of divisive policies and decisions, including the Muslim ban, overturning protections for Dreamers, and asylum seekers, enacting a cruel policy of family separation at our southern border, and failing to defend the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act in court. Mr. President, I have not been shy about expressing my disagreement with these decisions and others made by the Department of Justice during the current administration. However, one area where I strongly agreed with Attorney General Sessions was his decision to recuse himself from the special counsel's investigation into Russian interference in our 2016 elections. Mr. President, one of my core values is to figure out what's the right thing to do and try to do it. Not what's politically expedient, not what's easy, but what is the right thing to do. And after it became clear that then Senator Sessions provided testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee that called into question his impartiality on matters relating to Russia and the 2016 election, Attorney General Sessions recused himself from all matters related to the 2016 presidential election. That was the right thing to do. And it certainly wasn't what our president wanted him to do. The president has said as much repeatedly. I should say maybe he's tweeted as much repeatedly. And the president repeatedly admonished Attorney General Sessions for doing what I think many of us believe was the right thing to do. And here's what the president of our country tweeted on June 5th last year, 2018. And I quote, "The Russian witch hunt hoax continues, all because Jeff Sessions didn't tell me he was going to recuse himself. I would have quickly picked someone else. So much time and money wasted, so many lives ruined, and Sessions knew better than most that there was no collusion," end of quote. Well, Mr. President, let me be clear. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is not a witch hunt. It is, in fact, the unanimous opinion of the U.S. intelligence agencies and law enforcement community that Russia attacked our democracy and interfered in our 2016 elections. As a result of the special counsel's ongoing investigation, 34 individuals and 3 companies have been indicted or pled guilty to a range of crimes. This includes the Trump campaign manager, the Trump deputy campaign manager, Mr. Trump's national security advisor, and most recently, President Trump's longtime political advisor. Special Counsel Mueller, a lifelong Republican, who served with distinction in the Vietnam War, a war that I think I'm the last member of this body that served in the Vietnam War, but he served there with real distinction. He served with distinction as our FBI director following the September 11th attacks. He's not conducting a partisan witch hunt. He and the team he leads are striving to find out the truth, and in doing so, help us prevent future attacks on our democracy. I believe we should be doing everything in our power to allow Special Counsel Mueller and his team to conduct and complete this investigation free from political interference and partisan games. During the years I was privileged to serve as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Bob Mueller was the head of the FBI. I had a chance to work with him, to know him. My wife and I know his wife. He's among the finest people I have ever known in the military, outside of the military, in government service, outside of government service. Unfortunately, President Trump does not view political independence as a prerequisite for the job of Attorney General. Instead, he tends to view political independence as a disloyal act, an offense for which one should be not hired, but fired. Just ask former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Just ask former FBI Director Comey, whom I also came to know well during the time I served on the Homeland Security Committee and including as its chairman. Just ask former Attorney General Sessions. Recall with me, if you will, that after the November election, President Trump fired Attorney General Sessions and named the Attorney General's Chief of Staff, Matt Whitaker, as Acting Attorney General. This was a curious decision, as well as a legally questionable decision. Why would the President go outside the line of succession at the Department of Justice? I fear it's because of Mr. Whitaker's public comments regarding the Mueller investigation. Mr. Whitaker previously likened the special counsel's investigation to a fishing expedition, to a witch hunt, and implied that following the truth, this is a quote from him, could be damaging to the President of the United States and his family, and by extension, to the country, to our country. Really? Could he have been serious in saying that? Getting to the bottom of all this could be damaging to the President of the United States and his family, and by extension to our country? Another president a long time ago, Thomas Jefferson, used to say these words: if the people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. Thomas Jefferson. If the people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. Hardly the views of our current president, and it saddens me to say that. Well, despite publicly expressing these views that they clearly call into question his impartiality, Mr. Whitaker did not recuse himself from the Mueller investigation when he assumed the role of Acting Attorney General, even though he received a recommendation to recuse himself from ethics officials at the Department of Justice. Mr. Whitaker's staggering unfitness for the job is a big part of the reason why my initial reaction was positive when President Trump nominated William Barr to be our Attorney General. After all, Mr. Barr previously served as Deputy Attorney General and then as Attorney General during the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, someone I revere, I think that many of us revere. By all accounts, Mr. Barr is a well-qualified nominee, someone who's been a fine public servant throughout many years of public service. I strongly believe that we need Senate-confirmed leadership of the Department of Justice, and I want to make it clear that during normal times, I might be inclined to support Mr. Barr's nomination. In fact, I probably would. These are not normal times. These are extraordinary times. In addition to firing the Attorney General and the FBI Director for their views on the Russian inquiry, President Trump has reportedly asked those around him why he didn't have an Attorney General who was looking out for his personal interests. According to reports, the President has said, and I quote, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" during moments of crisis. And for those who may not know, Roy Cohn was President Trump's personal lawyer and fixer, who pushed legal tactics to the limit and also once served as staffer to Senator Joe McCarthy during a very dark period in our nation's history, a very dark period in this Senate's history. This is how President Trump views the role of Attorney General. Not as a lawyer to defend the right and the rights of all Americans, but as a fixer who will look out for him. Moreover, in his State of the Union address last week, President Trump highlighted what he sees, and I quote again, ridiculous partisan investigations, end quote. He went on to say, and I quote, if there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation, close quote. It is against this extraordinary backdrop that we must ask ourselves, well, what are Mr. Barr's views on presidential powers? What are his views on the investigation led by Robert Mueller? As it turns out, we don't have to guess what the answer is to that question. In an unsolicited 19-page memo that Mr. Barr sent to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and President Trump's personal lawyers, Mr. Barr shares his views, and they're clearly hostile to the special counsel's investigation. In a memo entitled Mueller's Obstruction Theory, Mr. Barr raises doubt about the special counsel's ability to follow the truth, while going on to defend President Trump's actions and even suggesting that the president has the power to limit the scope of this inquiry. In that same memo, Mr. Barr states that the special counsel's investigation into obstruction of justice may do, and I quote again, lasting damage to the presidency. Well, Mr. President, I believe that reasonable people can disagree, as I frequently did with my friend, former Senator, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. It's clear to me, however, that despite whatever your views may be toward the special counsel's investigation, the views expressed in his memo not only warrant Mr. Barr's recusal from the special counsel's investigation, they cry out for it. Attorney General Sessions did the right thing when confronted with a similar decision. However, despite expressing these biased views to President Trump's own personal lawyers, Mr. Barr says he will not recuse himself from the special counsel's investigation if he is confirmed. And to make matters worse, Mr. Barr refuses to commit to making the special counsel's final report public. Mr. President, earlier I asked for us to consider whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for all Americans or whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for one American. That one American happens to also go by another name, Individual One, the legal moniker given to President Trump in the Southern District of New York for directing his personal attorney to violate federal campaign finance law. Like Mr. Whitaker's public comments prior to his elevation to acting Attorney General, I fear that Mr. Barr's memo may have been an audition for the job and that his selection may not be a coincidence. During a Senate hearing in 1989, Mr. Barr plainly stated that the Attorney General is, this is a quote, the president's lawyer, close quote. Colleagues, these are extraordinary times for our nation. We must make it clear to the American people that the Attorney General is not the president's lawyer. We need independence at the Department of Justice now more than ever. And while I hope I'm wrong, I hope I'm very wrong. It is my belief that President Trump views this appointment as an opportunity to protect himself rather than the constitutional rights of all Americans. Ultimately, for all of these reasons I've laid out, I've concluded that Mr. Barr, despite his earlier service, distinguished service in many instances to our nation, does not in this instance meet the standard that's necessary to be Attorney General for our country now. And sadly, on that note, Mr. President, I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Next 24 hours, the Senate will do what it should do. That's actually go through the process of advice and consent with a nominee, this time for an Attorney General, William Barr. William Barr is eminently qualified. It's been interesting to be able to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk all day long today about how qualified William Barr is, but then always pause with a but, and then to be able to take off on a Mueller investigation. Well, let me get what this means by eminently qualified. He has an exceptionally impressive legal career. Serves at one of the top U.S. firms. He began his legal career actually as an analyst and a legislative counsel for the CIA decades ago. He worked on domestic policy for Ronald Reagan. He served as the Deputy Attorney General from 1990 to 1991, and then he served as the Attorney General of the United States for George Herbert Walker Bush from 1991 to 1993. When he was appointed to be the Attorney General in 1991, his nomination passed out of the Judiciary Committee with a unanimous vote of 14-0. Judiciary Chairman, a gentleman named Joe Biden at the time, called him a fine Attorney General. He was overwhelmingly confirmed by the Senate in 1991 in a less partisan time, when Democrats and Republicans both looked at his qualifications, not a political agenda. We have the unique moment to be able to look at someone who is a good Attorney General for the United States, who served faithfully, but then has a season away from that to be able to turn around and do it again. How many of us wouldn't want to redo something we did years ago? And to say, I did it and it went well, but if I had a little more time and I could do it over again, I would do things better. We have that chance with William Barr. It's a unique moment for us as a nation to be able to bring somebody back like that again. What happened under his watch? Well, he believed during that time period, and still believes now, that personal security of the citizens of the United States is the primary first duty of government and of the U.S. Attorney General. Despite what he's been smeared at this floor over and over again with people saying he's being hired to be the president's personal attorney, for those that have actually met with him and talked to him, he speaks openly about law enforcement in the United States. He talks about working with local law enforcement, U.S. attorneys, to actually prosecute crime, to be able to go after the issues that distract the American values and the American people from living the American dream. During his tenure, when he was Attorney General, he spearheaded the initiative like the Weed and Seed program, which removed violent drug offenders off the streets. Under Attorney General Barr in the 1990s, violent crime in the United States went down because they were aggressively prosecuting for crime. He's also the Attorney General that supervised the enforcement and the implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Incredibly difficult legal process to be able to go through and to be able to implement nationwide to protect the rights of individuals that have been overlooked in our country for 2 centuries, those with disabilities. It was a major feature of what he did during that time period. He brings this unique, important perspective of dealing with law enforcement, background, experience. All of those things look like they would be a slam dunk to be able to come to this floor and to have wide bipartisan support, except for this. Except that he's being used as a message in the Mueller investigation. It's not that he said that I'm going to stop the Mueller investigation. It's not that he said anything else about that. He did write a 19-page letter as an attorney into the law practice that's helping President Trump go through this process, and to say, hey, as a former Attorney General, here's all the things that you should be advised of when you're working with the president. Here are the key features. It seems like a very kind thing to be able to do for any president. He wrote the letter and all that information in and gave those details. Fine. He's also said over and over again, he's not going to undercut the Mueller investigation. But some of my Democratic colleagues have said, no, it's got to be more than that. He's got to recuse himself like Jeff Sessions did. He has to recuse himself. If he doesn't recuse himself, he can't be there. Well, may I remind you that the reason Jeff Sessions had to recuse himself was because he was on the campaign team for the president. And when he got into that position as Attorney General, the ethics team advised him from the Department of Justice, hey, since you're on the campaign team, you can't be the investigator for the campaign team on the campaign you were actually on. And at that time, Attorney General Jeff Sessions agreed and said that does violate ethics for the person on the team to help investigate the team, and recused himself. That was not William Barr. So all this talk that he's got to recuse himself like Jeff Sessions does, it's a completely different situation. Why should he recuse himself? Because apparently people don't want the Mueller investigation to have any supervision, which again I find fascinating politically, because I distinctly remember during the Clinton administration, many of the Democrat colleagues that are still in this chamber now being furious at Ken Starr. They can't believe Donald Trump would say he's frustrated with the Mueller team, but they had no problem with the Clinton White House literally saying we are going to war against Ken Starr. The term witch hunt is not new. The Clinton administration used that same term against Ken Starr. So this is a fascinating side-by-side to me to be able to look at this. Here's what I would advise. Let the Mueller investigation finish its job. They have a job, let them do its job. Quite frankly, the Attorney General shouldn't be in the day-to-day operations of the Mueller investigation. That's why we have a special counsel. But at some point, the special counsel has to turn information over to someone. William Barr is not going to be the one writing all the information for the special counsel. But neither should he have this incredibly high standard, and neither should he be held to some standard to do something that he's not going to do, and that is to go try to interfere in this process. He's made that very clear. He's also made it very clear, verbally, in committee settings, and in written statements, that he's going to release whatever comes out is under the law from the Mueller investigation. Now, I think some people believe that the Mueller investigation is going to release a big, giant written report like the Senate Intel Committee will do. That's not the task of the Mueller investigation, is to be able to release some big, giant report. Their task is to go through as prosecutors and to be able to recommend indictments. If they choose to write a report, that's up to them. Now, this Congress could try to mandate that, but that's not their requirement. They're a special counsel. This is a group of attorneys making recommendations. That's all it is. So don't judge an Attorney General nominee based on some accusation from some thought of what might happen and what he might do. Judge him what he actually says and what he has done. Hold him to that standard. I've also had some folks back in my state say that they've heard that William Barr supports the possibility of some states having red flag laws on Second Amendment. Now, I spoke to William Barr. He came to my office. We spent about 45 minutes together. We went through a whole litany of issues and questions of his background, the issues that he's dealing with, his passions, his dealing with local law enforcement, his cooperations with state prisons, consent decrees, religious liberty. We talked through drug trials and processing. We talked through a whole issue of gang violence, on and on and on, including the Second Amendment. He reiterated again that he's supportive of the Second Amendment in every area. And if someone loses their Second Amendment rights, it is only based on due process. That is a court being involved. That's always been the standard for us as a country. I've seen some of the things that have been written about him, that he's not supportive of the Second Amendment. That is absolutely false. And I can say those things based on my personal conversation with him and asking him those questions. But also see the things that he's actually written, not the things written about him, but the things that he's actually written and said about the Second Amendment. He's a protector of our rights and of the Constitution. That's one of the things that he has sworn an oath to protect as a previous Attorney General, and would have to be able to swear an oath again to be able to do that. This is a simple thing for us. We're looking at a qualified nominee with excellent experience and background and a passion to protect our country, who has shown a passion towards law enforcement and protecting our nation and reducing violent crime in our country. I'm looking forward to him stepping into that office and taking the lead with the Department of Justice. But, Mr. President, may I make a side note on this? This nomination reminds me again why it is so important that this Senate fixes our nomination process. We have a broken nomination process, period. If you take the last 6 presidents combined, take their first 2 years when they were putting their staff together in their first 2 years of office, for the last 6 presidents, 25 times someone in the Senate asked for additional time to debate that person. It could be any one of 100. One person asked for additional time to debate in the last 6 presidents, a total of 25 times. 25 times, somebody said in this body, in the last 6 presidents combined, we need a little more time to debate this person. So they asked for additional, what's called post-cloture debate time. That is a full intervening day, 24 hours, plus an additional 30 hours after that just to be able to debate. It's fine. Highly controversial nominees, entirely appropriate. But in the first 2 years of President Trump's presidency, that request has been made 128 times. 25 times in the last 6 presidents combined versus 128 times for this president. It's not because they've been all that controversial as nominees, though I'm fully aware President Trump has nominated some folks that created heated debate on this floor. But it was certainly not 128 times. In fact, many of the times after we had that post-cloture intervening day, plus another 30 hours, that person passed either unanimously or with 90+ votes. They weren't controversial. It was trying to shut down this Senate and to shut down this president to keep him from hiring his staff. That's never happened before. There's never been a time that the Senate has tried to prevent an elected president from hiring their own team until now. In May of 2017, I made a proposal to be able to fix our post-closure debate time, seeing what would happen. Continued that conversation over and over again with many of my Democratic colleagues. Last session, we brought in front of the Rules Committee a proposal that was made by Harry Reid. And then it was passed under Harry Reid's time and his leadership in the Senate. That is to limit post-cloture debate time and to be able to streamline that process. I brought that exact same proposal back out and said Republicans voted with Democrats to make sure that this process would work in 2013 and 14. Now will Democrats vote with Republicans